endlessly searching for an original sound.
Hey guys, welcome to Sinfully Fun Games, where we look at the sinful side of gaming. That's right, we're looking at another game released by Jast USA. Jast? Not sure actually. This is Adabana Odd Tales. Now this one is a demo, of course, like the last game, because I want to see if it's worth picking up while it's on sale. They're having their White Day sale, I believe. So let's go ahead and check it out, shall we? Starts with a horn. It was the kind of sleeper train ride that made it feel as though morning would never break. As I sat in that leather-bound seat in second class, I felt my worn-out consciousness flit in and out of dreamland. I dreamt of an arrow flying towards a brightly gleaming target, a wounded beast pursuing its prey, a solemn flying fish tearing through the waves. What button works? Perhaps they were visions born of a bound of sympathy with this lonesome train, racing as it was through the dark night in search of the dawn. Each time I woke, I felt like dawn must be approaching, only to realize the clock's hands had barely inched forward. I shook myself out of my listless daze. Having trouble sleeping? Someone inquired abruptly. It was a passenger, sitting with perfect posture, in the seat across from mine. The hands of sleep that had previously crept up on me to snatch me away without warning was now drawing back, cowed. Falling asleep was not the problem. Staying asleep was, yet that no longer troubled me. Fed up with this game of tug-of-war between sleep and wakefulness, I decided to engage in idle small talk with him as I waited for a gentler sleep. Though we shared a train cabin, we spoke not of our destinations or our purposes in traveling. I had no taste for the here or there or the now. Instead, I sought out comfort of times of yore, faraway lands, the incorporeal. I forgot to check this actually. So now you actually get to see this. I don't always show this. So there's no voice acting in this. That's what I wanted to check. Oh no, there's that right there. Can't turn her on. Music goes down just a smidgy widgy. There we go. That should be good. Alright. We spoke of odd customs in the places we had visited. Botanical marvels and magnificent celestial bodies, questionable truths professed by passing drunkards. It was a fruitless yet curious, delightful exchange, akin to the two people showing one another bottled clouds. Forgive my forwardness, but... Oh, that was my voice. I spoke up once more. We reached a suitable seg in our conversation. I was feeling wide awake by this point. Our meandering conversation had lowered our inhibitions as surely as a potent sake. This is very fun to read. Now that especially when you just kind of woke up. Now that I had spoken up, I was committed to what followed. What is that book you're holding? I couldn't help but wonder about it. I was referring to, of course, the book he held loosely in his arms. The book seemed oddly tawdry looking for one in the possession of such a well-groomed man. It appeared worn down and shabby, like a textbook used and abused. I doubted it had much in the way of material value, yet it was clear that, to him, It was a rare, irreplaceable treasure. After all, throughout the long ride, not once had he stowed it in his luggage. Instead, he cradled it protectively as though it was a one-of-a-kind jewel. His hands cradled the book with a gentle care, apparent even through his leather gloves. It looked like a museum exhibit resting upon a velvet-covered stand. Oh, I apologize if I have said anything untoward, I quickly added, nervous that I might have encroached upon a sore subject of the man. Such an obsession like that of a young girl clutching a doll was unbecoming of this gentlemanly fellow and his soft-spoken yet self-possessed tone. I imagined that there could be some circumstance which would pain him to touch upon, which in turn gave me a pang of conscience. Not at all, rest assured I took no offense, he replied after a moment's pause, in that same calm tone. That is most relieving to hear. May I inquire, is that a hand-bound book? I looked at the book in question with no further reservations. He opened his hand and allowed me to see the tome. Just as I surmised, from the brief glimpse up till that point, the book's title was handwritten, and no doubt with a brush. Adabana Odd Tales. The title's beautiful brushstroke spoke of a methodical, yet free-spirited hand. Am I to imagine the story tells of a fruitless flower, or perhaps it is the story itself that is frivolous? Did you pen this curiosity-tile book? Inwardly, I was mortified at my own brashness. I can't read anymore. Unicorns are not good at reading. Yet he showed no sign of annoyance or impotence. Instead, he inclined his head in a non-committal gesture. I suppose you could say I had a small hand in its crafting. Not all of it is my work, though. Would you say, then, that you co-authored it with someone else? Something like that, yes. It was hard to believe that these vague, non-committal responses were coming from the same person who had been so clear and elegant moments before. My curiosity piqued. I conveniently forgot my manners and leaned in with interest. What is it about? Is it a work of fiction? That's a harder question to answer than you might think. I fear any synopsis I provide might run over long. Yet again, his response was indicative of nothing at all. He gazed at me modestly, as though prying to see if I was the type to be interested in long stories. Had he not wished to speak, his expression would be more reserved. He had wished to speak. He would have started by now. I could only conclude that deep down he cared not whether he spoke or kept his words to himself. It was as though his mind was perfectly balanced on a set of scales. I gently placed my own curiosity. Please, I would love to hear it. Upon one side of those scales. After all, it was a long night, and the train ride would be even longer. As you wish, our story begins. He closed his eyes, as if pausing to turn the pages in his mind, before opening them once more to speak. I do love the art. Sorry if that was too quiet. I have fallen into a deep hole. I'm gonna actually try to fix that in case the music, for once, is too low. At least that is what the girl thought to herself. It was the first thought to cross her otherwise blank mind. Looking around, she saw that she was in a forest, and it was nighttime. Winter had left every tree emaciated. What were once golden red fall leaves were now desiccated sepia ones, their stems clinging on for dear life to the branches. As the wind tore leaves from trees, they fluttered in whimsical swirls before finally coming to a rest on the ground with a light rustle akin to skittering bugs. This scene set as it was against the backdrop of the misty blue-gray darkness was like something out of a scroll depicting the advancement of a season. The only thing visible through the oppressive haze was the moon, its light beaming down from the sky in meager consolation. I can read, I promise. One could hardly blame the girl for mistaking the moon's beautiful round light as a way out of the dark depths she stood in. She gazed up at the moon for some indeterminate amount of time before wrapping her arms around herself with a shiver. It was the motion of someone who was only first noticing her appearance after feeling the chilly air on her bare skin. The girl looked down at herself. She saw that she was clad in a bright white kimono. It had a neatly starched haneri, a finely embroidered horisod, and an origin-adorned obi. Her limbs felt constricted, like those of an ascetic in training. But the dress's paled appearance was no misshape by its maker. It was a rejection of the wash of pale blue that the darkness forced upon all things here. The girl slowly brought her hands up to study them. Her fingers, too, were a shade akin to snow. She would have believed they were a doll's hands, but for the way her fingers moved at her will. She blinked and tilted her head to one side. She tried to glean something from her look, but found it too bright and gave up. In fact, this white that she had only just laid eyes upon for the first time now felt more like a blank color, one that had seeped out from her own mind. Looking around, she found no clue as to where she was. Peering down at her clothes and hands again, she still had no idea who she was. She recognized the moon as the moon. She recognized the trees as the trees. That much was trivial. So why could she not ascertain who or where she was? More to the point, she was not even certain how grave it was that the knowledge of these things eluded her. Here she was in a bleak world that grew colder by the moment, yet all she could do was stand in silence like a soulless doll or a lily quietly withering away. Rawr. The tranquil silence was abruptly shattered by a most unpleasant sound. Judging by the echo, the voice, joltingly loud as it was still a ways away. Any innocent bystander would have deemed it the howl of some great beast. They would have undoubtedly imagined some ravenous, four-legged creature with furious claws and fangs before fleeing in a blind panic. Yet, there stood this hollow shell of a girl. She turned her head toward the loud roar, but the danger of the situation seemed lost on her. She made no effort to flee. Instead, she leaned in toward the source of the noise, peering through the trees. The next growl came from much closer, an admonishment of her carelessness. As the girl instinctively backpedaled, a burning figure advanced towards her. The figure was giant, befitting of its loud voice, and branches snapped in its path. It had a head, hands, and feet. It was bipedal, less like a beast, more like a man. But one side of it was bulging awkward, like it was ready to burst at any moment. This lopsided figure could not possibly be human. Its figure wavered strangely, never fully coming into focus. It was as though a blood-tinged fog had cold-seated and taken on a form of its own. Its heavily distorted head had two gaping black voids, the only places not permitted by the sickening crimson. Were those its eyes? They looked down at the girl ominously. The girl drew a breath. She held a hand to her quickening heart. Her clean black mental state was starting to be dyed another color. She could not process that it was her, that she was she could not process what it was she was seeing, or what it was she was fleeing. It was the chill that ran through her own inability to move, that gave her a vague sense that whatever this was, it was not good, and it was not normal. All she could do was stand there frozen, unable to breathe, the looming figure reflected in her wide eyes. Just then, something sprang out from the thicket nearby. It was a boy clad in dark clothes that blended into the darkness. Moonlight shone on his face to reveal a tense expression and a canny gaze. His finely toned muscles gave him a supple frame and a smooth bearing. The dry leaves crunched audibly under his feet. It all happened so fast, the wind might as well have abruptly taken on human form. Yet when the girl's heart leapt, it was not out of fear or startlement. For unlike the monsters, this one was not out to hurt her. In fact, she could tell within moments that it was the monster whom the boy was here to face, not her. After all, he was now standing protectively in front of the girl, his tall posture concealing her from the view of the monster's hollow eyes. Or maybe it had been in her heart, kindled by the glimpse she had of his eyes as he leapt in, that had persuaded her, so his pale eyes did burn with a cold fire. The moment the boy landed, he swept an arm out of his side. It was as though he drew power from the earth into his hand. For a moment, she could have sworn he was a bird unfurling one wing, but on closer inspection, she noticed something in his hand that made her blink. Yes, it was a typical writing brush, its tip gleaming black, like it had been dipped in fresh ink. It was not something one would expect to see brandished against a hostile monster in the midst of the dying forest of the night. Squint as the girl might, it was indeed a slender brush, and not at all something likely to transform into a handy blade. Huh? But the boy swung the brush anyway. He gave a sharp cry of focus, his brush tips lashing horizontally through the air like a blade. It was a mighty stroke, but it was just a brush stroke. It should have done nothing but splash the monster with ink. And yet the monster howled. It was very obvious that it was the howl of pain. The boy's brush had instantaneously seared a neat horizontal black line across the monster's torso. The top half of the monster's giant form slid cleanly off the lower half, exactly where the line had been drawn. Yes, a brush had slashed a monster in two. The girl stared at the spectacle with bated breath. The monster's body did not topple to the ground. However, instead, it gave off a black smoke-like substance before fading away. The sight made it more like the monster had been made up of tiny soot-like bugs than flesh and blood. It all happened in an instant, in a very unspectacular fashion. After those strange depictions, the two presences were back to being in a quiet, late autumn forest. The boy eased his bald penum stance and turned to face the girl. The girl met his gaze easily. The boy's eyes gleamed not with cold hostility, but with tranquil moonlight. While he had signs of youth in his features, his cheeks were drawn back undaunted, and he wore a neutral expression that implied a certain maturity. He had the air of a scholar in a warrior's body, an air most befitting the uncouth yet refined concept of brush-wielding monster slayer. As the girl took the boy's appearance, something flittered briefly through her mind. Was it the boy's features or his eyes that reminded her of something? Was she trying to remember the boy himself? Regardless, it was an image she had to fight to keep in her sight, lest it be lost forevermore like a rabbit fleeing into the fog. I am unfamiliar with this boy. I do not know him. Ultimately, she was left with little choice but to accept those facts. Still facing her, the boy returned his brush to a cylinder container at his waist, presumably some kind of ink and brush case. He did it smoothly and without hesitation, like he had done it many times before.
怪我はないか?
はい。
She shook her head instinctively, surprised at her own words. There was nothing out of the ordinary about them, yet they felt oddly comforting to say, reminding her that she was indeed human. Another thing occurred to her that she felt it important to express.
助けてくださりありがとうございました。
別にそれよりも
Another low growl echoed through the woods. The boy had just slashed one of these things in two, so this had to be a new one, or perhaps more than one. The girl broke out in goosebumps at the realization that her life was in danger.
話は後だ。まずは逃げよう。
逃げる。
The girl repeated the unfamiliar word. Flee where? The boy sprang into action before she could ask. He unsheathed the brush from the case he had just stowed it in and held it in the air. This time there was no glorious, full-arm sword swing gestures. Instead, he made simple brush strokes from his elbow and waist and wrist. His brush ran through the air as though writing on invisible paper, yet black brush strokes stayed in place where he wrote. Door. When he completed his strokes, he had drawn the character for door. Just then, the hastily scrawled character rippled and the strokes started to blend together. Like ink running down invisible paper, the liquid spread and took on a different form. Now it was a picture rather than a word, a tall rectangular shape with an inset circle, a fusuma and handle. The character for door had transformed into a door drawn in simple, inelegant brushstrokes. The boy reached out with no sign of hesitation and opened the door. Curiously, the dense woodland scenery was conspicuously missing from the other side of the rectangular shape. More curiously still, there was an entirely different scene visible on the other side.
これは。
The girl's soft murmurs were drowned out by the monster giving another much closer roar.
近くだ。さあ、早く。
The boy faced the girl again and gestured to the door, the place he had arranged for her to flee to. But the girl stood there unmoving. Get your ass through there, girl! Logically, she knew she should do as he said. She could detect signs of movement in the woods, even as the monsters growled. It was only a matter of time before the monsters picked up the scent of the young flesh. No matter how puzzling the door he had presented was, it was clearly her only way out of this.
他にはどうしようもありません。ですからさ、たったの一歩です。
She urged herself forward, but her toes curled back and her feet refused to budge. A question crossed her mind. Was she accustomed to doing this in the life that eluded her recollections? She had stood before the unknown, petrified in fear, showing no regard for far more pressing issues. Just drag her. The girl's standstill was frustrating even to her, yet she could pick up no sign of agitation or annoyance in the boy's gem-like eyes. He watched her quietly, as though gauging her thoughts, before speaking up in a gentle voice. Get your ass through
大
there.
丈夫だ。ともかく行こう。白姫。
The hand he extended out to her was like a beacon in the fog. That, and the ring of that unfamiliar name, Shiromi, was mildly jolting to her. It felt like a call from afar, one she could not place.
はい。
The girl placed her hand in his almost instinctively. After all, it was only proper to accept such a polite invitation. Steeling herself, she allowed him to usher her through the door. The girl and boy stepped out into the late autumn woods into what looked like an old rundown storehouse. And that's actually where we're going to leave it. So I'm going to pick up this game and we will eventually do a Let's Play of it. I plan to do quite a lot of visual novels, of course, as I always do. But you're going to get a spice in of other games. If you haven't checked out my live streams, you should come check them out. Both me and the Eldritch Abomination like to switch off over on Twitch, on Sinfully Pure. Come and help us hit partner and be amazing. You can check out our shop where we add lots of new things, even body pillows. We have cute little guinea pig stuff coming up too. And you can check out our Patreon with exclusive merch, our OnlyFans, and our Subscribe Star. Thank you to everyone who has been supporting. Hopefully soon we'll hit that goal so that I do, videos in less, not so many clothes on, as they say. So I'll see you guys next time. Bye guys! Have a fantastic day!